Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and this is going to be a bit of a filler video because I'm busy recording, like as far as making like real videos go, I'm busy with the Radeon 7 PCB breakdown for Gamers Nexus, so if you're waiting for that, I am working on it. But anyway, so this is a bit of filler for my own channel. Here we have one of the many cards in my very, well, ever-growing and currently already rather large collection of GPUs. This is a KFA2 GTX 780 Hall of Fame, right? There. So I guess if you're not a European, you've probably never heard of KFA2. And even if you're a European, you've probably never heard of KFA2 either because they're actually not that well known as a brand. Like they're not that well known. But KFA2 is the European name for Galax. And the reason why KFA2 exists is very, very simple. Because before Galax was called Galax, they were called Galaxy. And they couldn't sell anything in Europe under the Galaxy name because of trademark, issues. So eventually, Galaxy renamed themselves to Galax, and they still couldn't sell anything in Europe under the Galax name, so we still have KFA2. So this is actually from before the renaming. So at the time, Galax was still called Galaxy, but now, even now, you're still gonna, like, if you want to buy a Hall of Fame card, or if you want to buy any Galax cards in Europe, you're still gonna be buying them under KFA2. So that's just kind of something interesting. Now, I obviously picked this card up because it has a white PCB. This is a GTX 780 Hall of Fame. And I mean, I also, well, yeah, basically, I picked it up secondhand because there's a secondhand electronics store in the city I live in, and basically whenever I get the chance, I like to, check out what they have, and I saw one of these on their shelves, and I was like, well, it's white, and I don't yet have a card with a white PCB in my collection. I do also want to get my hands on like a red PCB 7950 or something, but anyway, so currently I don't have a white card. I have blue PCBs and I have black PCBs. I have some brown PCBs, which are disgusting, but I don't have a white one and I don't have a Hall of Fame. So this is the only Hall of Fame GPU I currently have. And so that's basically the main reasoning behind why I picked it up. And today we're just going to take it apart and check it out. Unfortunately, this thing kind of sucks. So, I do like the look of the heatsink on this card, but I can't say I like the performance of the heatsink on this. It looks very substantial, doesn't it? But unfortunately, once we take it apart, you'll see, that, it really, like, it's very good at looking substantial, but not so great at being an actual heatsink. So that might also be because I've run this card almost exclusively on 1.3 volts, because some of the cool features that these cards have being Hall of Fame cards is there's a Hall of Fame voltage control utility, which makes it super convenient to control voltage on cards like this one. And there's an equivalent utility for older EVGA classified cards, which is called a classified tool. And so, yeah, there's like some pretty, like, if you're buying older NVIDIA cards, I would really look out for like Hall of Fames or classifieds, because the voltage, like, getting full voltage control on these cards is so easy. If you have, like, you can get those two utilities somewhere. Actually, I have both of them, so if you can't find them, I'll just, like, leave a link. I need to, like, set up an account to upload stuff and then share it all. But anyway, yeah, so there's basically a really nice, convenient voltage control utility for this card. Now, unfortunately, even though this card does have, like, voltage, read points right here and here for VCore and memory voltage and ground, right? So they have all these voltage checkpoints. Unfortunately, the utility I have, at least, does not support the PCI rail, so I can't control PCI. But VCore and VMEM, I have more control than I could ever ask for, because, I can set so much VCore that I wouldn't have this card very long if I maxed that utility out. So, yeah, that's the nice thing about sort of the Hall of Fame series. And with the 700 series, these cards are nice because they're like sort of the last generation of NVIDIA cards that actually scale with core voltage. So I've been benching this thing just on air cooling, and, I've been pushing it all the way to 1.3 volts, mostly because, as I said, the heatsink really isn't doing that great if I try to push it past that. So that's kind of that. Now, other interesting things about the PCB, I mean, you've probably noticed that, there's extra capacitors on the memory rails, and we'll get to why that's there. Unfortunately, this thing kind of sucks at memory overclocking, and that was my desperate attempt to get better memory overclocking working, but yeah, no, it didn't fix it. Now, the other thing worth noting is these yellow capacitors right here. So this yellow packaging is kind of famous for basically being, oh my god, like screaming that, hey, these are tantalum, which is true. These are co-caps from Kemet, but the yellow packaging itself isn't the, well, the yellow packaging, more importantly, what it tells you is that these are the really freaking expensive tantalums. So the thing about the yellow packaging, like, I'm not sure what other companies do yellow, but if you have Kemet ones, Kemet tantalums in yellow, these things are super expensive because this is the high endurance lineup from Kemet. So they're rated for like longer lifespans and all of that, and the end result is they're like 3 times more expensive than the black packaged tantalums that Kemet makes. So yeah, and I know that because because I was looking for tantalums to use in my modding, and I very quickly decided that there's no way I'm buying the yellow ones because they are super expensive. And they don't really, like, in terms of actual electrical performance, like, yes, they're high endurance and they should last way longer than the black packaging ones. As far as their electrical properties, like ESR and ESL goes, they're actually the same. But it's just kind of interesting that Galax did opt to go for, well, I assume they opted to go with these yellow ones just because, you know, they, like, for people who pay attention to this, like, these are, well, actually don't pay that much attention, because if you do pay enough attention, then you'd know that you can get black tantalums from, like, Panasonic and who else makes them? Like, there's a bunch of companies that do tantalums in black. But these, I think, well, these are, you know, more easier to market as, hey, look, our capacitors are yellow, that makes them special. So, and it does make them really expensive. It doesn't really make them all that special as far as I'm concerned, at least. They're really more meant for, like, automotive applications where you really, really need the enhanced sort of, you know, lifespan. And in fact, I think that's even very specifically what the marketing from Kemet actually says they're for. But yeah, Galax decided that they're going to throw them on a GPU. So these are really expensive. Anyway, let's start disassembling this thing. So this thing has a, you know, rather simple assembly, which I'm a fan of, because it does make, you know, cleaning the card and disassembling the card rather easy. So we just have 4 spring-loaded screws for the heatsink itself, and here is why the heatsink is kind of terrible. And I already unplugged these before because I tried to shoot this once and decided that I didn't like that take. So, here we have the heatsink, and I think it's abundantly obvious why it's not that good at being a heatsink. So, the fin stack isn't quite as, like you can definitely find cards with more substantial fin stacks out there. The other thing is that this part of the fin stack is just kind of, I don't know, like, I'm pretty sure this outer edge here just doesn't get all that useful because the heat would have to travel from this vapor chamber down here all the way to there just through the very thin aluminum fins, which just does, yeah, that's not going to work. That's why we have heat pipes, right? Like, that's the whole idea behind having heat pipes, is just help the heat travel into the actual fin stack. But Galax decided, like, a lot of cards, what you'll see is if, you know, you have the heat pipes, they'll tend to do like a, they'll do an S with them, right? So that they go into the other side of the fin stack as well. And Galax didn't do that because, for clearance reasons, as far as I can tell, because, yeah, like, the heatsink, like, the card pretty much ends there, and they can't really have the heat pipe, like, jutting out. Though it is worth noting that this, what looks like just a copper plate, is actually a vapor chamber. So, and we can tell because you have the little fill point right there. So they could have actually gone for more heat pipes, because this being a vapor chamber, it's really excellent at just spreading the heat very quickly to, basically the entire object, right? That's the whole idea of it, is that you can apply heat to the center, and even, like, this corner would get hot. So they really could have gone for, like, a 5th heat pipe that would just sort of curve back into this part of the fin stack, and they could have made the fin stack more substantial as well, as far as I'm concerned. They could have probably gone for a 3rd, like, they could have also maybe gone for, like, a 3-fan design, which they have later, you know, later Hall of Fame series cards do go for 3-fan heat sinks. But And actually, earlier Hall of Fame cards also went for 3-fan heatsinks. So this heatsink to me kind of has the VaporX 7970 heatsink. Uh, like that's the heatsink that I feel like most comparing it to, because that's a similar situation. You have a vapor chamber, though admittedly Sapphire has the vapor chamber way larger and it like soaks up the memory chips and everything. But this has, you have the vapor chamber, you have the heat pipes, and then you just don't have very much in the way of fin stack or fanage. And the end result is that, yeah, the heatsink, once you start raising the voltages, really doesn't do so well. And that's also true of the 7970 VaporX cards. Unfortunately, this is, in my opinion, one of the nicer looking Hall of Fame heatsinks. So, oops, and now I have thermal paste on me. Great. Yeah, as far as the actual cooling goes, I'm not impressed with this one. But hey, it is what it is, and anyway, let's move on to the card. Now, the card itself is also kind of a disappointment. So really, at this point, the only reason why I haven't returned it is, well, at this point I can't return it because of the cap mods, but the other reason is just I wouldn't have returned it even before the cap mods. I still want a Hall of Fame card just because I think I want cards from the sort of, the extreme overclocking series, and also because the PCB is white. So I'm just keeping it because it's white. And if I get a better Hall of Fame card someday, I might get rid of this, but the other issue with this card as we keep disassembling it is the actual silicon on it. So the core, the core that's on this card is not spectacular. It has an ASIC quality of 65.5%. At 1.3 volts, it finishes 3D Mark Vantage in the low 1300 megahertz range, which isn't exactly awful. I would assume that if we bumped it up all the way to 1.4 volts and had a proper cooling system, right? Because that heatsink is just not, at 1.3 volts, this thing is finishing benchmarks at 70 degrees. So at 1.4 volts, I don't really think it would scale very much because it's already running really, really hot. And it would just end up running even hotter. And so ultimately, I need to throw it on the water block. And I just haven't gotten around to doing that yet. And I probably will eventually. But, as far as the air testing goes, this thing's not really been spectacular. But the other issue is that the not so amazing core is paired with the absolutely horrendous Elpida GDDR5. So Elpida is bankrupt now. They ended up getting bought by Micron, which is where Micron got their GDDR5 operations from. But Elpida is kind of famous for two things: making really great DDR, some really amazing DDR3 that tended to die. It was kind of funny. These memory chips would do absolutely insane settings at relatively high voltages, and then they would break. So it was not great. So finding them these days is actually kind of pretty hard because a lot of them would end up dying. But anyway, so they made some really amazing DDR3. And they made the worst GDDR5. Just absolutely the worst GDDR5 you can get your hands on. And this card is no exception. Even with 1.7 volts on the memory and all of those extra capacitors, this stuff only does 1740 megahertz. It immediately crashes if you try to set it to 1800. Right? Most other GTX 780s using real memory chips from real GDDR5 memory manufacturers, though Elpida was a real one. It's just there's memory chips. The thing is they do spec, right? So it's just that's the thing the manufacturer cares about. But as far as overclocking goes, these chips are terrible. So if we compare it to SK Hynix based 780s or Samsung based 780s, this is terrible because those cards can do 1800, 1900, even 2 gigahertz memory clock. This does 200 and this does 1750 at best. Actually, it doesn't even do 1750. It does 1740, barely. And yeah, so the memory on this thing is terrible. The core isn't particularly amazing. So the main reason I'm still keeping this thing is because it's a Hall of Fame card and it has a white PCB. Now, if we take it apart further, take off the little finned heatsink for the VRM, just to check that out, see that I mean, the VRM on this thing it's not bad, but it's also not spectacular. And of course, the, separate little aluminum finned heatsink like this is optimal for LN2 configurations, of course, because if you're on LN2, if this was like a lot of modern cards will integrate the VRM cooling into the main heatsink itself. Which for me personally is really, really annoying because then I'm stuck in a situation where it's like, well, I have a water, like, I use a core only water block just because they're more convenient than like full cover ones, because the full cover ones are more expensive and they don't fit everything. So if you have a core only water block, this is great because you can just, throw that on there and it works fine. If you have an LN2 pot, you can just keep that on there as well. So that's one of those things that a lot of the extreme overclocking cards of the past would do, is they would either a lot of them would basically have I know MSI would like ship their lightnings with like an extra VRM heatsink in the box, because if you took if you took a 290X Lightning apart or a 780 Lightning or one of these older Lightning cards apart, what you'd run into is that they'd have a full cover base plate, and the core and memory part of that base plate wouldn't clear LN2 pots, so they would include a separate VRM heatsink. But a lot of other manufacturers would just go for VRM only heatsinks that look kind of like this, and this card's goes with that option, which I'm a fan of. But it is in terms of like, if you have the card on the stock cooling, this is obviously not going to give you as good VRM temperatures as if it was integrated into the heatsink, but well, if your VRM is good to start with, you don't have to worry about that so much, do you? So the VRM here is a 8-phase V-Core VRM controlled by a CHL8318, which is the standard high-end voltage controller for GTX 780s. Like, if you have any extreme overclocking GTX 780, it's going to use a CHL8318, which is a international rectifier part. CHL was a company that International Rectifier bought, I believe, or they were like a brand that they ran. I can't remember right now. But either way, like this is an International Rectifier part. So we do have a real 8-phase V-Core VRM. All of our current monitoring shunts are right here, right? So these three right there. And then we have our input filtering chokes after that. We also have another input filtering choke down here, so that's kind of interesting. And in fact, we do seem to have some kind of early NVIDIA current balancing technology right here with the extra MOSFETs. And I have actually seen a couple cases of older NVIDIA GPUs where these blew up. Like, the rest of the card was fine, and then the current balancing stuff blew up. So, adding failure points. It's not bad enough that you have to worry about the VRM. You also need to worry about the current balancing MOSFETs not getting overloaded, which is really unlikely, right? Because they don't need to those don't need to be switching on and off constantly. But still, it's just like, well, it would be better if the VRM was just permanently hooked up to 12 volts, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, this card still has them, and if they blow up, then I'm just bypassing them or something. Hopefully they don't blow themselves through the ground plane or something, because as long as they don't short something, I don't care. Anyway, so V-Core VRM 8-phase, it uses International Rectifier 3550 power stages, so these are like the predecessor to the 3555. 60 amp power stage, lower switching frequency tolerance because they are the older model. The 3555 is basically take a 3550 and they upgrade the frequency range. And I think they also add some other features, but I can't remember what exactly right now. So anyway, still, this is like, it's a nice solid 60 amp power stage. So you get a 480 amp maximum current capability on this V-Core VRM here. And I mean, the thing is, you can definitely get GTX 780s with stronger VRMs than this. And especially you can get 780 Ti's with stronger VRMs than this. So anyway, but it's not a bad VRM, and ultimately I don't really plan to run this card on LN2, mostly because the LP to VRAM is terrible. For like dry ice overclocking, I think this is perfectly good. But yeah, and at least it has like a heatsink that I can run it with and throw a fan on it with enough RPM. They should be fine, and we should be able to run them at pretty close to their rated current capability. For the inductors, we have Coiltronics, which these things are really, really good in terms of like current capability and temperature tolerance. They are also well, these are also some of the whiniest inductors I'm aware of. So these were really popular on AMD reference cards, and, well, yeah. that kind of tells you everything you need to know. So Galax opted for those as well, and I've not noticed the card coil whine, but that's mostly because while I've been running the card, I've had this button here pressed, this switch pushed in. So this switch puts the fans in full speed mode, which is probably why I haven't noticed any coil whine, because the fans are relatively loud, even though they don't actually do that great job of that great a job at cooling the core. So, yeah, but these inductors are kind of like 290Xs use them. I think they're good for, like, I'm not sure if this specific model is, but actually I'm pretty sure this is the exact same model that 290Xs use. These inductors right here, R15107R3. So these might be like the 70 or 60 amp variant. But anyway, very high quality, great for server applications, not so great for consumer applications because they tend to whine. Though it also depends on how you run the actual, how the voltage regulator is running yeah, but so it's kind of interesting, like, nice high quality parts in the VRM. It just doesn't have that many phases. Memory power is delivered by, memory is not so high quality. Still the same inductors, but we only have two phases, and those are made up of discrete MOSFETs. Then again, GDDR5, it pulls more power than like GDDR5X, HBM2, blah, blah, blah. But it still doesn't pull anywhere near as much power as your core. And that's why, you just have a two-phase VRM for that with discrete MOSFETs. That's controlled by that chip over there, which is it's kind of an interesting decision to have that all the way over there, because this doesn't, like, that chip is the actual driver for those MOSFETs. And generally, if you want to make your life easier when it comes to driving power MOSFETs, is you want to put whatever's driving them as close to them as possible. Which is one of the main advantages with power stages, where the drivers are actually integrated directly into them. That's why power stages have such an easy time hitting really high efficiencies, is because they don't have they don't have issues with the driving of the MOSFET gates. Unlike, say, discrete MOSFETs can occasionally run into, which basically means that you end up with, if you're driving discrete MOSFETs, what you end up with is it takes forever for the MOSFET to turn on. And the longer the MOSFET is in a sort of, in sort of limbo between turned on and off, the more power loss you get as your switching loss. So, yeah, generally, if you have something driving the MOSFETs, then it's going to be right behind the chips. But here, Galax decided to put that all the way over there, which I assume is because, they kind of had space in this area, the PCB. I guess they just didn't want to screw up the layout of the card. Ultimately, there's ways to work around that as well. But, yeah, generally you'll see drivers just crammed, like, in between the MOSFETs or right next to them, or, on the other side of the card, or just as close to them as possible. But anyway, so, yeah, Galax opted for that. That kind of covers it. There's not really much else to the card. We have a white PCB, which is the main reason why I picked it up, and then we have some terrible memory with a not-so-great core, decent V-Core VRM, totally acceptable. Like, memory VRM is not spectacular, but it's totally acceptable. And we have a very meh cooler, unfortunately for me. And yeah, that's the GTX 780 Hall of Fame. They have the same 8-phase for, I think, the GTX 680. Where for like a 680, this 8-phase is great. For a 780, this chip's much more power hungry. I'd prefer more phases, which you'd actually find on like other 780s from other manufacturers. Anyway, I'll finish the video here. So thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comments section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, which includes teardowns of old irrelevant junk like this, then I have a Patreon. There's also t-shirts and like other stuff you can buy from Teespring. There's links to both down in the description below. They do help out immensely, because where do you think I get the budget to buy stuff like this? So yeah, thanks for watching and goodbye.